Everybody. My name is Billy from eMaint. In today's workshop, we're going to be covering, I'm sorry for the header, I forgot to fix that, sorry about it, everybody, but we're going over inventory and spare parts in eMaint X4. So just some notes for today's session, that today's session will be recorded, and your phones and or microphones for today's session will be muted during this presentation. But do feel free to ask questions at any time. We'll be doing a question and answer session the last 15 minutes of this presentation to try to answer as many questions that you have on today's subject. And as I mentioned, that this session will be posted later to eMaint University for viewing. So if at any point you need to leave because you have something else to do, or if you just want to recap everything that happened in today's session, this will be uploaded into eMaint University later today. And at the end of this session, we will be providing a survey that will have all the information about this workshop and get your feedback on future workshops and anything that you want to see eMaint present in the future. So before we go over the different subjects that we're going to review today, I would like to ask a poll question. Usually it's a typical yes or no question, but I'm looking for a little bit more detailed information about the audience. So what I'm asking is are you currently using inventory in eMaint? And if so, are you using a single inventory location or are you using a multi-location inventory in your eMaint system? And if not, you can say if you're not sure if you're using one of those different types of locations, or if you're not using inventory at all, you can go ahead and answer that as well. So I'll give everybody about 30 more seconds to answer the question. All right, and close it up in just about 5 seconds. All right, so we got about an 88% participation. That's fantastic. And the poll results are that 37% of the viewers today are not currently using inventory. So if you're not currently using inventory, this is going to be a great session to get a much better understanding of how inventory works in our software. And we had a mix. We had about 25% of people who have single inventory locations and 28% of people who use multi-location inventories. Just so everyone knows, today's session will be done in an account that uses multi-location inventories. So if you are using single inventory location, you're going to see it look slightly different, but it will have all the same functionality. It's just a little bit more simplified. And for anyone for multi-inventory locations, we're going to go over some of the differences that make an account multi-location versus a single inventory location. And for the 10% of people who aren't sure what type of inventory system you have, that's what today's session will help clear that gap for. So you'll be able to see if some of the features in the account that you're going to see exist and they don't exist in this session, that don't exist in your account, you're probably on a single inventory location system. And if you've signed up for eMaint, by default you will have single inventory location, but it is a feature set that is available for free as long as you're at a professional or enterprise level that we do offer to our client base in case you are interested in using it. So I'm going to go ahead and move on to the next slide, and we're going to go over some of the topics of today's session. So we're going to start off with some of the basics of inventory. We're going to show you how you can create a part in eMaint. And then once we create the part, we're going to show you how you can set up suppliers for that part. We're going to show you how you can create multiple different locations the part that you're creating can be assigned to. So this way when you're charging out inventory, you can have multiple different storerooms that hold this part, and you can state what the on-hand quantity is for that part. We're also going to show you how you can relate parts to different pieces of equipment that you have in your system. And then we're also going to go over the different action options available when you're viewing an inventory record. Once we go over that, we're going to go over some different ways you can utilize inventory. We're going to show you how you can attach parts to preventive maintenance schedules in your eMaint system. And then we'll show that once a PM generates, that this information goes into parts requirements. What is the purpose of part requirements on a work order? And then we'll also show you how you can physically charge parts out of inventory utilizing work order part charges. Once we go over that, we're going to move on to purchase orders. So we're going to show you some of the basics of creating a purchase order in eMaint. We'll show you how you can create the body of the purchase order and how you can make the detail line so you can order all the parts you need to bring into inventory. And then at the end of that, we'll actually show you how you can receive that inventory and close out the purchase order. Then near the end, we're going to show off the parts reorder list. So anytime you have a part that needs to be reordered, you'll have a list of all the suppliers that have parts for reordering and all the parts for those suppliers that need to be reordered. Then the last part of today's session, we're going to show the parts checkout feature. So for anyone who's familiar, in our latest version 11.2.8, we came out with a new feature that lets you charge parts out either directly out of inventory or you could relate it to a work order. So I just want to briefly go over this new tool, where you can access it and how you can use it. So that's it for the slideshows. We're going to go ahead, we're going to minimize this data, and we're going to log into an eMaint account. So here I'm under my demonstration account, and here I'm going to go over to inventory. When I head over to inventory, as you can see here, this is the list view of all the parts that I have in my eMaint system. So all you have to do is click on inventory to get a list of that. Now, if you want to take a look at what an inventory record looks like, we could go to one that already exists. So we're going to, for example, take a look at the quarts of redline engine fuel that we have over here. We're going to go ahead and click on that item number. And there's different fields of data that relate to it. So you might have a few less fields on this screen, but don't worry too much about it. This screen doesn't determine if you're single inventory or multi-location. This is just the main information about the inventory record itself. So for anybody who's using the eMaint system and has understood if you created contact records, asset records, every record you have in the eMaint system has a key field. And under the item number field, this would be our key field. So this is a value that's unique for each individual part that you'd be storing in the eMaint system. So this has a specific limit of 15 characters. You can have numbers, you can have letters. You can't have any special characters like a $sign or an @ sign, but you can have either dashes or underscores that substitute spaces, which are also not allowed. So those are just some of the rules of item numbers. So we're going to go ahead, and as we can see this part here, we're going to go ahead and we're going to create a brand new one. So I'm just going to click on the Add button on this inventory record so we can create a brand new inventory record. So the first thing we're going to have to do is type in that item number, and this is the value that has to be unique for each record in our system. I'm going to call this record 5010, and that's going to be the item number I am assigning to this inventory record. This Acme part number is a custom field I created in eMaint, so it is not a required field for this information. So I'm going to go ahead and leave that blank, and in your account you probably do not have that. Now the next thing I need to do is I need to add a description of what my part is. So I need to know specifically, this part's 5010, what does 5010 mean? I need a better description of my part. So for example, I might go into here and say that this might just be a box of screws. So I might just say screws 3x10. So you might have like a measurement size of the different screws that you have. And you'll put that in the description. If you're going to be utilizing parts, so in an example, if you're utilizing parts that you're going to be putting in and out of inventory, charging them out on work orders, bringing them in on purchase orders, you're going to want to check the stock item button. And that's just to make sure that these are stock items that you're moving in and out of inventory. And you can also go here to the right where you can choose the unit cost for that part. So for these screws, if for example I just say each screw we buy is 5 cents, I can go ahead and put 0.05, and that's going to state that each screw that I'm buying is 5 cents per screw we have on hand. And then the on hand field by default is not a field that we can add, but it's a field that once we save this record, we can define what our beginning balance is. We'll take a look at that once we save the record. We have two fields here on the left, and these are specifically for the reordering properties in eMaint. So one thing I mentioned we'll go over a little bit later is the parts reorder list. So for the parts reorder list that we have, to utilize the parts reorder list, we have to set a point that once we are at or below the reorder point, this is when you want to repurchase this inventory record. So for example, we might say that when we have only 10 of these screws on hand, you might want to reorder more screws to bring on hand. And for example, you might have a reorder quantity that when we've hit 10 or less parts, we want to reorder 100 of these screws. So we can put that here in the reordered quantity. And then on the right-hand side, we have this field called U/M. It's just a field for information to let you understand what type of unit of measurement you're applying to this part. It doesn't have any specific functionality, but it's more for your information when you're viewing that part record. This next field, this actually does exist on your account, but it's not on the form by default. This field right here is called allocated. And what allocated is when you go to this field, is that if you're utilizing parts requirements on the work order, which we'll show later, and you've added a parts requirement record to a work order, this allocated number is going to show up. So you know how many of these parts you currently have allocated to existing work orders in your system. And then when you actually go to that work order and you charge out those parts, which is physically bringing them out of inventory, that allocation number will go down to tell you that you've charged out those parts. We have a location field here, but this actually isn't utilized for multi-location inventories. This is just a field that if, for example, you're using in your system a single inventory location, it just helps you know which location this part is located at. So if you're using single inventory location, you would put all that location information here on the main inventory record. But if you're using multi-location like we are in this account, we're going to go ahead and leave that field blank. And I'll show you where we can fill that information in a little bit later once we finish creating this part. And then you could go ahead and you can state what condition the part's in. I'll say it's a brand new part. And you can state what category is it used for. And I use it for mechanical, I use this part for mechanical machines. And then you can go ahead and you can fill in some class information, but we won't do that. And then you have some part fields specifically for manufacturing and supplier information. I'm going to keep those fields blank for now because I'm going to show you after we create this part the proper way that we can associate the different suppliers for our inventory records. So this has all the important information we have saved now. So I'm going to go ahead and hit Save New Record. Now if you were doing this on a single inventory location account, your record would just save and nothing else would happen. Your part is now created. Now on a multi-location inventory account, you're going to get this pop-up right here. And it's going to ask you, okay, you've created this new part. Which location should this part be for? And I have right here, I have a few different locations added into my system. So I have a main location, I have a location for row A10, A20, A30, B10, B20, and B30. And these are all the different locations I have stored in my eMaint account. So for example, if I want to charge this out to row A10, I could say that I've created this part and it's now in row A10. And you can specifically state how many do you have on hand. And I'm going to say I have 20 of these parts on hand. So this way we can create our beginning balance. And I want to have the same reorder point and reorder quantity as my inventory. So I'm going to go ahead and keep that as 10 and 100. And I'm going to save that record. And there we go. So now we've created a location. So what we have is we have the main information here for the part. And then we have related tables which lets us apply more information to our inventory record. So if I head over here to related tables, you'll see that I have a few different related tables related to inventory. The first one you're going to notice here, this is actually exclusive to multi-location inventories. So if in your account you do not have this related table called inventory locations, that means that you are using a single inventory location, since you are not applying a part to multiple locations in your system. That one part is only ever in a single location. So if you do have this multi-location inventories account set up, you'll see here on this related table which location the part is applied to and how many you have on hand at that location. And you even have the ability to add an additional location for that part. So you have the ability here to hit Add Location. So for example, I also have this part on the location called B10. I can go ahead and pick B10 here and say I actually have 15 of these parts on hand at the row B10. And then if I want to, I can go ahead and fill in what my reorder points and my reorder quantities are. So I might say 10 and 100 again and save that record. And you will now see that we have two locations for this part. And you'll see at location A10 that we have 20 on hand. And at location B10, we have 15 on hand. And if we actually go back to the main details of that inventory record, you'll see that our on hand is 35. So in a multi-location system, when you're viewing the main record, it's actually a combination of all of your locations summed up into a single number to know how many we have on hand total. So if you're on single inventory location, this would define how many you have on hand at your one location. If you're on multi-location inventories, it's a sum of all your locations together. And if you need the on hand for those single locations, you can see it here in inventory locations. So we do have a few other related tables here. One of them is the 12-month part history. So if you want to see an audit trail of all the different ways that your parts have gone in and out of the system, you can view that here in the 12-month part history. We're not going to have much information here because we just created this part. but you could see for the inventory location A10, we had a beginning balance with today's date of 20. And then we've also, for the location B10, have a beginning balance of 15 right here with today's date. And anytime we charge out parts, anytime we do purchase orders, all that type of information is stored here in the part history. So the next related table is called item suppliers. So in your eMaint system, if you want to go ahead and you want to apply different suppliers to this part, and you could have more than one, you would create them here in this item suppliers related table. And to do that, we'll just go ahead and hit add new record here next to item suppliers. When you click on that, you'll see a few fields will automatically populate, such as a unique ID, so you don't have to worry about a key field. Your item number will be filled in, as well as a description about your item number. And then you also have the ability on supplier ID to look at your contacts table and pick a supplier that will attach to this part. So I'm going to go ahead and hit the magnifying glass here to take a look at all the different contacts that are in my system. And you can see here I last had a filter that said the letter J. And what I'm going to do is on the category field, I'm going to type in SUPP to say that I am looking for suppliers in my account. And you can see here, if I go ahead and stretch this out, that I have a few different suppliers I can choose from. I got Grainger, I have Central Isuzu trucks, I got Camcat tractors, I got McMaster Car, Krones, Home Depot, and Z1 Motorsports. So you can see that I can go ahead and pick any of these contacts that I have in my system. So I'm going to go ahead and I am going to pick the first one, Grainger Industrial Supplies, and I'm going to apply that change. And you'll see that both the supplier ID as well as the company name are filled in based on using our lookup. And you can modify this lookup just like you would for any lookup in eMaint. So if you want to have more fields on the contact record that populate here, that is an option for you. Now, a few other fields you might want to be filling in is supplier part numbers, manufacturers, and manufacturer part numbers. So the supplier part number, the manufacturer information can be different for each supplier that you're using. So you can go ahead and you could fill in that information here. So you might say my supplier number is 123456. And my manufacturer, we can go ahead and just put in information here. So I might just say American Bolt and Screw, and their manufacturing part number is 654321. Now you can also go in here and you can add a rating. So rating doesn't actually do anything, but the main thing to know about this field is that if you have multiple suppliers attached to a part, you might associate a rating to them, maybe based on how well they get you a part, what their costs are. You could put in a rating here that if someone else who isn't as familiar with inventory is looking to purchase inventory from a supplier, they could see what you consider the highest rated supplier to buy parts from. So I might give this supplier an 8 out of 10. So I'll go ahead and put 8 there. So the last few fields here, last cost and receive date, you don't have to fill in any information here. This is specifically if you do a purchase order in eMaint and you receive that purchase order into inventory for this supplier. What will happen is this record is going to update. So it's going to give you what your last unit cost is for that part, so you know how much you were charged the last time you did a purchase order from them, as well as the last time you've received parts from that supplier. So that way you have some information the last time you've purchased this part from that supplier. The last option here we have is default. So in the eMaint system, you can have a single supplier for each individual part that is the default supplier for that part. So that way, if you set this field to true and you save it, the main inventory record has all the supplier information saved to them. It is important to have at least one default supplier, because as we go in and try to use some features like the parts reorder list later, you're going to want to go ahead and utilize the supplier that you have to make purchase orders. So I'm going to go ahead and save this record. And then we're going to go back using the Go Back button here to take a look at our main inventory record. So you'll see here that we've now applied an item supplier to our part. And if you look at the record details, some of the information can fill in here if you have workflows to do it. So the next one we have here is related assets. So for example, on related assets, you might have it set up in your system that you want to relate this part to different pieces of equipment that you have available. So you can do that by going over here to Add New Record. And the first thing you're going to see is it's automatically going to fill in the item number and the description. And then you could use the drop down here to pick which specific machine you're applying this part to. So this isn't specifically saying you're charging out a part to that asset, But the way that this screen is normally utilized is that, let's say, for example, anytime I'm doing work on this hot water tank, when I need these screws, for example, how many do I typically charge out when doing work on that asset? So for example, if every time I work on this asset I normally use 4 screws, I'll go ahead and put a quantity here of 4. So that way I know usually on each time I do a job on this piece of equipment, this is how many I take out of inventory to complete the job. And that's usually how we utilize this related table. So once you fill in that information, you could fill in category, unit of measurement, but they're not required. You can just go ahead and hit Save New Record. And that's it. So the nice thing about this is that when you're viewing the part record, you'll be able to see that this is the part record here, and we can even add the asset ID onto here. So we got the asset ID up here, we want the part number below it, and you can see the asset and the item number associated. And if we actually click on the asset ID right here to go to that specific piece of equipment, so here I have the equipment here, I have a related table called Related Parts. And you could actually see all the parts that are related to that asset and how many of them are normally charged out when you do work for them. So that way you can see the information directly on that piece of equipment. The last related table we have here is for kit items. So if you're creating a part that might be a kit, so a good example would be like an oil change kit. So anytime you change oil, you might need, for like on a vehicle, you need 5 quarts of oil, you need a washer, you need an oil filter. What you could do is you can create a part in the eMaint system that would actually be a kit, that would hold all the items. And the kit items would be each item you'd put into a kit. Another example would be like a first aid box. So you could say that on the kit items, I need 5 quarts of oil, I need 1 oil filter, I need 1 washer. And anytime you add inventory into your system through the kit items, it's actually going to take out of inventory from those individual items that exist, and it's going to add them to this kit. And the overall cost of the kit would be the overall cost of all the parts. So I'm not going to go too detailed into that feature today, but it's just a good feature to know that exists in our system. So now that we've gone ahead and we've created this part, we're going to show you some of the different action items that exist on that part. So when you're on the part, you have an actions drop down here, and you have a few different options you could choose from. The first one we have here is adjustment. So if I click on adjustment here, you're going to see that I could go ahead and I can adjust what my inventory is. So for example, if I pick row A10, you'll see that I currently have 20 of them on hand for that location. And let's say, for example, I'm looking through my parts and I realize, hey, I don't actually have 20 on hand. We did a cycle count, we realized we actually only have 12 on hand. You can go here and put -8 in the adjust quantity to state that we're taking 8 out of inventory. So that way we know that we actually have 12 on hand at this location. And if you want to go ahead and proceed, that's going to save that transaction. And you'll see that the overall inventory has reduced from 35 to 27. And you'll see here on the inventory location that the on-hand has changed from the value of 20 it was before to the value of 12. And if you check the inventory history, you'll see we have a physical count adjustment that was made that is saying -8 to know that we've removed 8 out of inventory based on a physical count adjustment. There are a few other nice things, so that would be something you would do if you're doing a single inventory location, for example. You'll always have the location of main. You won't have to worry about switching that. But in multi-location, you want to make sure that you're picking a location that does exist. But there is one adjustment type up here that doesn't exist in single inventory, that doesn't exist in multi-location, and that's the ability to transfer parts from one location to another. So if you pick transfer location up here, you're going to have the ability to pick the location you're pulling inventory out of into the location that you're bringing inventory into. So for example, I might say, for example, in row B10, I have 15 on hand. I want to go ahead and I want to take 5 out of inventory from row B10 and add it to row A10. So what you can do is on adjust inventory, you could say that I'm taking -5 out of inventory, and that's going to go ahead and adjust our inventory. Oops, sorry, I want to make that a +5. So that way we're stating that we're bringing 5 from the first inventory out of here to make this 10, and we're bringing 5 into inventory on A10 to make this 17. There we go. So our on-hand is going to say the same on the main record, but if we go into related tables, you'll see that the on-hand for the 2 locations have changed to show that the on-hand is now 17 at location A10, and the inventory for B10 is 10. If we click here to load the data, you'll see that both of them have a physical count called X for lock, saying that 5 went into inventory for A10 and 5 were removed out of inventory on B10. Some other actions we have is the ability to do a key change. So for anyone who doesn't know, a key change is the ability to change the key field that's on that inventory record. So right now our item number is 5010, but if we wanted to change this, we could do this by doing a key change. And the reason that's done is just to make sure that anything that's been done for that inventory record, so all the history for the inventory, all the location information, all the charges, that ID that we update is changed across the board to make sure that all of our data stays consistent. The next option you have here is purchase. So if you want to make a purchase order for this part directly from the inventory record, you could use actions purchase here to create that purchase order. You could also utilize recalculate. So if we click on recalculate now, it's going to say that we don't need an adjustment. Our quantities match our transactional history. There is always a chance that the audit trail is not showing the correct numbers on both the locations and the on-hand as it should. So if you want to make sure that the system is correct and that your audit trails are successful, you could use recalculate, which makes sure that your audit trails match the numbers that you're seeing on the screen. And it'll do a recalculate to fix that if there is any inconsistencies. The next option we have here is barcode labels. So if you want to see a barcode label for that part, you can go here to barcode labels, and it's going to go ahead and it's going to render in a PDF screen here what your barcode looks like. So you can see that you'll have your item number up here, your description here, and a barcode label right here. Now this is adjustable from eMaint's end, so if you do want to add like another field to this specific label, we do have that capability. So if that is something you're interested in, please get in contact with your customer success manager to get a little bit more into discussions on that feature. The next one we have here is print. So if you want to print the screen that we're seeing now into PDF form, you have that ability. And then these last two options, create kit and break kit. So if this was an item that we were making as a kit, so like our oil change kit, for example, what you could do is, let's say, for example, you took items out of inventory and you created 3 kits for your users to use. You could utilize create kit here, saying I've created 3 kits. And what that will do is it'll bring your on-hand from whatever it was before and it'll add it 3 more to the on-hand. And what it will also do is it will take inventory out of all the items related to this kit. And if you do go above what your on-hand is, so let's say, for example, you created 3 kits, you only had 8 quarts of oil on hand, the system will give you a message before saying, hey, you only have enough oil to create 1 kit. Would you like to create 1 kit? And it will actually prevent you from creating more kits than what you actually have for on-hand inventory. So the next thing I want to show you is attaching parts directly to preventive maintenance schedules. So if we go to PMs here, I'll actually go to one of my assets. So we'll go to this hot water heater that we have here. And you can see that we have a preventive maintenance schedule here called monthly maintenance. So if we go to that preventive maintenance schedule, we have a related table attached to that PM, and it's called PM parts. So if you want these parts that might be required for the job to come automatically over to the work order, we could utilize this related table PM parts to have that information come over. So we can come here to add new record. And what we could do is we could use a lookup to find the part that we have in our system. So I might say, let's find part 5010. Pick that part and apply it. And then you could say that you want to use this part. And then you could auto issue out 4 if you'd like to. You could use the recommended quantity of 4. So auto issue will just issue out the part automatically. Recommended quantity would be how much you're recommending should be done for the job. And this is the number that will show up in recommended quantities on the work order when this becomes a work order. So we're going to save this record. And we'll go back so that way we can see that we have this part created here on PM parts. So one thing to note is there is the possibility that when a work order is being created, that PM parts does not come over to the parts requirements related table. And that's actually related to different system settings that you have available. So if you are the administrator of your eMaint account, there's a few inventory control settings that you should be aware of that whenever you're setting up inventory that you might want to have on or off in your system. So we're going to take a look at some of those inventory control settings real quick before we move on to the next step. So here in our account settings, we're in the inventory control settings here on the left. And you can see here that we have some different options. So the first one you can see here is your inventory method. So by default, when you purchase an eMaint account, you'll be utilizing the standard inventory method, which just shows you what your unit cost is based on your last transaction. Now, if you do have to utilize different accounting principles for inventory, we do offer FIFO and LIFO as well as moving average price as different inventory methods you can use in your system. If that's something you're interested in, just like the last one, please get in contact with your customer success manager, and we can see if what we can do to make sure we implement that into your account. The second option here is called Use Multi-Inventory Locations. So you could actually determine if you're on a single or multi-inventory location just by going to this screen here. And by default, this would say no if you're not on a multi-location inventory. But if you've decided that, like after watching this session, you're ready to move towards that direction and that you do want to utilize multi-locations, we can run a tool on our end that will turn that on for you. So that way you could utilize multi-location inventories. Just know that usually when we turn on multi-location inventories, that's usually a permanent thing. So you'll be stuck using multi-inventory locations for the life of your eMaint account if you do choose to turn it on. You do have a few different options you can do. So one of them is called Allow Direct Part Charges to Assets. So there is an action option on an inventory or on an equipment or an asset where you could actually charge a part out directly to an asset. So that way you don't have to create a work order to charge parts out directly to a piece of equipment. You could allow zero quantity inventory adjustments. So what that means is, for example, if you're not worried about your audit trails, inventory going in and out, you just need to state that on a work order, I'm charging 10 of these parts out today. On another work order, I'm charging out 15 of these parts, but you're not worried about the inventory process. You could turn this feature on so that way you could charge out parts. But if you are actually taking a look at your audit trails and making sure those are consistent, I do not recommend turning this feature on. The next one, auto allocate parts. This is a really good feature that is specifically for the PM parts related table we're talking about. So if this option is turned off, when a work order is generated from a preventative maintenance schedule, those parts will not come over to the parts requirements if this feature is off. If you do want those parts to come over to the work order when a preventative maintenance schedule is generated, you want to turn this option on. So this feature is called auto allocate parts, and it is recommended if you want parts to go from a PM to a work order to turn this feature on. Then we do have a few other options. Create stock allocation warnings. So for example, if you are utilizing part allocation and you're allocating more parts than you have on hand, you can have a warning show up. Auto create stock requisitions for allocated parts. So normally whenever you have the reorder points, it's based on how many you currently have on hand plus the amount you have on order. If that number is less than what your reorder point is, then it will actually put the item in the reorder list. What allocation does is that if you have any parts allocated, it's actually going to go ahead and subtract the amount you have allocated from that equation. And if that number where you're on order plus your on hand minus your allocation is less than your reorder point, then it will also add it to your reorder list. Or if you're using requisitioning, it will add it to your stock requisition card. And then if you want to utilize the equation for that, you can turn this feature on. And then the last option we have here is, will you allow duplicate related parts and assets when you're on that related table? So for example, if like one time you're charging at a part for 10, another time you want to charge out that same part for 5, it's asking, would you like that part to potentially show up on that related table multiple times? If so, you can have this option turned on. If not, you can turn this off so that way you can't have duplicate parts on that related table. So this next section right here, inventory locations. If you're on a single inventory location account, this section will not show up on your screen because in a single inventory location setup, you are only using the main location. So if you are utilizing multiple locations, this is the section in eMaint where you actually put in all the locations you're using. So you would define what your inventory location is here. It'd be a 10-digit character, same thing as a key field that defines the location. And then you would give a description of what that location is. And you do have a field here called default shipping address. So for example, if you're creating a purchase order for this specific location, you could have the ship to field fill in with the default address that you put into this field here. And then the last one we have here is default email addresses for inventory control. So one of the features we've talked about already is the ability for parts to be on the reorder list. So what happens is when a part does go to the reorder list, you can have different individuals receive an email anytime a part has hit that reorder list. And what you can do is you put the email addresses here on a per location basis. So you might have one guy who's specifically set up that at all locations they'll have their email address here, or it might be set up specifically that one guy is at main location, another inventory manager is at A10, another one's at A20, and when their specific location is below that reorder point, they can receive an email to be notified that they need to repurchase parts for that location. So that's where all that information is stored. So let's go ahead and let's head back to that preventive maintenance schedule we were looking at earlier. So what we're going to do is we're going to manually push this purchase order into a work order, just because I want to show you some of those related tables we have, that parts requirements related table, and I want to show you the work order part charges. So we'll go ahead and we're going to manually generate this PM. Once our work order is generated, I'm going to head over to related tables, and you're going to see that we have a related table here called parts requirements. And then right here in the parts requirements, this is the different part that you would attach, and then this is the part that would show you how many you currently have on hand. So this way what you could do is you could see all the parts that you need for a job, and it'll be here in the parts requirements related table. And then what you need to do is once you've actually charged those parts out of inventory, you could head over here to work order charges, and you could hit the add parts button here, where you can go ahead and you can use a lookup to find the part that you want to charge out. So I'm going to pick 5010 again. Pick my location, so I'm going to pick the location A10, and I'm going to go ahead and say I'm going to charge 5 or 4 of these parts out of inventory, and then I'm going to hit save and return to save my record. So that's gone ahead and that's charged the part out of inventory for 4 at that location, and that's how you take inventory out on a work order charge. Just as easy as going to add part, picking the part number, picking the location, and then removing the quantity. Now, if you're on a single inventory location, you do not have to pick the location, but on a multi-inventory location, you will need to pick the location to make sure that you're charging the parts out of the correct location. Then if we head to this part, we can see that our on-hand is now changed to 23. You'll see that our on-hand is now 13 instead of the 17 we had before. And if we look at our part history, you'll see that we have a transaction called issue, showing that we've issued 4 of these parts to the work order 1358. So we know exactly which work order that this work order part charge was associated to. So that goes over doing part charges as well as it goes over parts requirements. Now the next thing I want to show everybody is how you can create a purchase order. So you could do that through the purchase order table right over here on the left. And this is an example of what a purchase order looks like. So the main body of the purchase order is going to have your order information, but not any of the items that you're actually ordering. So it'd be information such as the supplier you want to purchase the part from. What date is the purchase order created? Which location is this part being created for? Is it the main location, or is it all the other locations that we have available? What is the status of the purchase order? Is it open with the letter O, or is it closed with the letter C? Is our purchase order related to a work order? So if our purchase order is related to a work order, you could put the work order number here, and if you have it attached to a work order, when you receive those parts in inventory, it will actually automatically charge them out to the work order if there's a work order number attached to it. If there's no work order number attached, it will not charge out the part immediately after you receive it. And then any other shipping information such as who you're shipping it to, what you're shipping via, freight information, terms information of your contract, any of that other information, you could do it here. So I'm going to go back. Let me head back to purchase orders. Oops, okay, gotta get through that. And we'll go back to the list view. Now I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to add a brand new purchase order. So I'm going to go ahead and fill out my purchase order number, which is done automatically. And I'm going to fill in a supplier ID. And I'm going to pick a supplier, Granger, right here. Then I'm going to go ahead and fill in some ship to information. You can fill out any information here. Delivery date information, shipping information, so on and so forth. But this is just the main criteria we need. So this is just the base part of the purchase order. Now, once you create the purchase order, the main information for the purchase order to actually add the lines to the purchase order is the detailed lines here. And we can add those by hitting Add New Record right here. So once you create a detail line, you'll see that the first line number we create is number 1, and then we're going to head over here to item number. So we can go ahead and we can find, let's say for example, we want to purchase a few of these screws. We'll go ahead and pick the item number. And once we pick the item, we also want to pick the location. So if I want to purchase more of these parts for the location A10, I'm going to say location A10 right here. And then we can go ahead and say how many do we want to purchase. So in quantity ordered, I might want to say I want to purchase 100 of them. And I could put 100 right here. And you'll have some other information that's auto-filled up by picking the part, such as the supplier ID, the supplier, all that information is pulling over from the default supplier that I have. And then if you have any other information to fill out here, you can, but it's not necessary. So we're just going to go ahead and save our record. And now we have our detail line. So if we actually head back to the part, we're going to take a look at the history once again. And you're going to see on the history that we've now issued a purchase for this part. So the purchase of the part is not saying that we've brought it into inventory. It's saying that we've made a purchase request for this part, and this is the purchase order number created for that part. And then when you want to go to that part and you want to receive it, we'll go back to the purchase order. We can go to Actions and Receive on the purchase order. And when you do that, you'll see your supplier information, and you'll see all the line items associated to that purchase order. And then if you want to say that I've gone ahead and I've only received 20 of them right now, you could say that you've received 20 of those parts. And you could actually do a partial receipt of that purchase order. And then we could process that information. And then if you look at the related tables, we actually have a field over here called Receive Quantity that will show us that our received quantity is 20 and the date that we've last received that item. But we could also go back to Receive once we've received the entire inventory, and you could either type in 80 manually, or you could use autofill, which knows how many we have left to receive for that part, and you could leave it at 80. And once you've met the amount that you've ordered, so we've ordered 100, you could either have it close out by picking close, or you can let it do it for you automatically if you've hit the maximum amount of items. So once we pick 80 and we process that, we're going to close it, go to related tables and refresh it, and see that you have a received quantity of 100. And if we go to Actions Receipts, so that's another option, as you can see, all receipts, you'll see that we have a few receipts here, one that says that we brought 20 into inventory, and another receipt that says we brought 80 into inventory. So you can see all the different receipts that occurred for this purchase order. And if we actually go back to that part real quick, we can take another look at the history real fast. Give me just a moment. There we go. And we take a look at the 12-month part history real quick. You'll see that we actually have two receipt records for that part. One of them showing that we had 20 on hand, and one of them showing that we had 80 on hand. So that way you can see all the different receipts and all the transactions that existed. So the last two features I want to show everybody real quick is the parts reorder list, as well as the parts checkout feature. So if you want to see all the parts that you need to reorder in the system, in the main menu drop down here in the top right hand corner, we have an option over here called Purchasing Center. And the very first option within Purchasing Center is the parts reorder list. And this is where you can see all the suppliers that have parts that need to be reordered. So here I right now have two parts that need to be reordered. So you can see the supplier name here on the left, the total cost of all the parts that need to be purchased from that supplier, and the number of items that are on order for that supplier itself. So if we go ahead and we click on Z1 Motorsports here, you can see that I have part 1001, and you can see that I need to purchase more quarts of oil for that specific part. You'll see that I currently have 5 of them on hand, and you'll see that my reorder point is 5, and you'll see that my order quantity here is 25. So you'll see that all the information is filled out here, and if you need to add additional to be reordered, you can change this number. But if you don't need to and you want to process this into a purchase order, you can do it in one of two ways. You can either process this check line to make it a pending purchase order, to make it into a purchase order at a later date, or you could apply it to an existing purchase order by adding a number right here, saving the transaction, and then if we actually head over to purchase orders, then it will be added on to the purchase orders. So that's how you go ahead and do that. So the last feature I have here is the parts checkout feature. And this will exist here on the tile menu. And to access it, you'll go to your name here in the top left-hand corner, and then you'll go to Parts Checkout. So when you're utilizing multi-location inventories, the first thing you're going to see here is all the different inventory locations that you have. And you'll see that I have a main location, I have my rows A10, 20, 30, and my rows B10, 20, and 30. So what I'm going to say is, for example, I want to charge that a part from my row A10. And I can go ahead and I can type in a part number here. So for example, 1001. If I type that, you'll actually see that the item is being added here, and you can see what the on hand is for that location. So if I do 1001 again, what you could do if you have a barcode, for example, and you scan it, is that when you scan it into the field, it will automatically add it again. Paste it, automatically add it again. So you have a barcode scanner that actually hits the enter button after you scan it. You'll see that you can quickly scan parts, and you'd be able to add them to this screen. And you can do it for different locations. So for the example, for this one right here, I might have one at the main location. If I do a charge for 1001 at the main location, you'll see that you can do charges to multiple locations for that part. So you can see I have 2 on hand at the main location, and I'm checking out 1. And you can see that I have 3 on hand, and I'm checking them out, all 3 of them, for that location, row A10. And if you don't associate a work order number when you're charging out these parts, when you're charging them out, it will do a physical count adjustment where it will remove it out of inventory. Now, if you associate a work order number to it, it will actually make a work order part charge. So that way you could actually charge out multiple parts to a single work order at the same time. So essentially think of it as almost like a shopping cart where you go ahead, you check out all your parts, pick which work orders they're for, and then once you're ready to check it out, you hit checkout right here on this button, and that's going to go ahead and it's going to check those parts out of inventory. So if we actually go back into the inventory, I'm going to go to 1001. Got a synchronized filter in here, so that's why it's not showing. So there we go. We'll head back. You'll see that we only have 1 on hand at our main location since we took one of the 2 on hand out, and you'll see that we have none on hand at the A10 location. So that's a different way you could utilize parts checkout. So that is it for today's session on what the features are for the different reordering. So what I'm going to do is real quick is just, give me just a second. So we're going to go over some of the upcoming workshops and different things that we have. So here in the upcoming workshops, we do have another one happening on Wednesday, August 30th, by Scott Stone, who's the Customer Success Manager at Fluke, and he's going to be going over gathering data for your CMMS with the Fluke team. And then you also see there on the right, you do have a best practices webinar that's going to be done by Allied Reliability's John Schultz, and that's going to be done on Wednesday, August 23rd at 11 a.m. For anybody that's interested, if you have any new people, any new users that are showing up, or if you're a new user yourself and you want to get a basic understanding of eMaint, this is a great training that we do once every Tuesday at 1 p.m. where either myself or another trainer at eMaint will go through the new user webinar process every Tuesday at 1 p.m. Anybody that's interested in getting a very detailed training on the boot camps, we do have our boot camps here in Bonita Springs, Florida. So we have 4 different topics for work order management and PMs, reports and dashboards, systems administration, as well as purchasing and inventory, and those are happening all across the next few months. So we got some inventory, work management reports in August. We have system administration in September, and then here's are some of the dates that we have available. And for anybody that's interested, we are having our biggest CMMS training event of the year. Accelerate 17 is coming back. It's going to be happening here in Florida in Fort Myers at the Sanibel Harbor Marriott Resort on November 7th to the 9th. So we're going to talk about all the latest new innovations for eMaint X4 and also eMaint X5 that's coming out. Get some education and training on the latest CMMS software for X4, X5, as well as some information about some best practices in the maintenance world. Get the opportunity to network with different eMaint users in your system, as well as being able to get live support right there at Accelerate. So that's it for today's training, everybody. Thank you for watching, and we're going to start the Q&A session.